Did you know that over 50% of Americans said that they've watched a crime show in the last month? While critics argue that these shows glorify violence, millions of viewers are learning how investigators solve crimes, recognize red flags, and they learn how to protect themselves. You should listen to this speech because there's a huge debate rising on this topic, which a lot of people are uninformed about, and you might be one of those people. And I've been researching this topic for around 3 weeks now, so I think I'm very knowledgeable enough to convince you on the subject. Today, I'll be persuading the class why serial killer documentaries and shows are educational and informative instead of being harmful. First, I'm going to talk about the problems of people not viewing them as beneficial or informative. Then I'm going to talk about what stops people from having the same stance on this that I do. And then I'm going to talk about solutions and its educational value. People that don't see these shows and documentaries as beneficial or informative are being closed-minded, and they're missing out on opportunities to learn and become more aware of their surroundings. These shows teach us how investigations work, how evidence is used, how criminals are caught, and they help people understand the justice system. They show real detectives, real interviews, real forensic tests, and they also explain how DNA tests and witness statements lead to solving cases, which helps people understand the justice system and the dedication that people have to seeking justice for their cases. This type of media also raises awareness about real safety issues by sharing warning signs, victim stories, and how communities can protect themselves. Viewers learn that people can become a vulnerable target. A lot of victims of these crimes are people that are seen as vulnerable by the person who did it, which helps them avoid being in these situations themselves. It also teaches viewers how to be alert and empathetic and just kind of be more aware of everything going on around them. These shows and documentaries also help people understand the psychological and social issues behind crime, mental illness, trauma, toxic environments, etc. By looking at what motivates criminals, people can gain awareness about how these problems start, and this encourages more open conversations about mental health, prevention, and how society can reduce violence instead of just fearing it. So this scan over here by Amen Clinics shows how this is the brain of a murderer, and it has all those little holes and stuff are signs of low activity, which leads murderers to doing bad things because there's literally something wrong in their brain, which you can see on these scans. Now that I've talked about the problems, I want to talk about the causes and barriers. People are prevented from viewing this media as beneficial or educational because of societal influence and current trends. People are stopped from believing in this issue because of the influence around them. Natural instinct is a big part, and horror film promotion also puts a negative energy around the concept from the beginning. A lot of these documentaries and shows are automatically kind of advertised as a horror film or something along those lines, which just puts a negative idea around the whole subject and it makes people become automatically closed-minded. It's also the way that people are raised. People are not automatically raised to think that these things are good, and also the lack of teaching in schools and classes also limits people from having a more open view about it. It adds stigma that's hard to erase in adulthood, and people are also scared of real-life similarities. A lot of these documentaries and shows mimic things that happened in real life, which scares a lot of people away from watching these things because they're scared that it's going to happen to them too. Michelle Martinez, who's a professor at ASU, quotes in a 2024 article that underneath the dark layers and beneath the screens, they reflect our deepest social anxieties, mirroring society's moral panics and cultural fears, which shows the cultural fears around us. Society paints a picture of these shows and documentaries and films as being morbid and gruesome all the time. This makes documentaries not assumed to be a moment to teach, but instead something to hide. Sophie Yarn, who's a professor at Boston University, says in a 2023 quote, "We have an opportunity when we look at these serial killers to tell the story in a way that isn't so individualistic, but to contextualize it in a bigger history of power and inequality." This shows the abilities that these shows and documentaries have to educate and inform people instead of just being something to be scared of. The more educated and aware people are, no matter the topic, could always save someone or prevent something from happening. There's also a judgment and a lack of empathy in society from things like the Monster Show. Salome Halou for Variety, who's a writer for Variety, said that Monsters debuted with 2.7 billion minutes streamed. So this show became super popular because it was trending. It was like the #1 show on Netflix for like 20 weeks. And this allowed their case to be re-looked at, which is something that doesn't happen to a lot of cases where people could have been wrongfully convicted. So a lot of people that also usually don't like watching crime or don't like kind of gory things, a lot of people watch this show just because of the popularity and that it was trending, which tends to not happen to other cases that happened around 30 years ago, such as this one. Now that I've talked about the causes and barriers preventing people from seeing these things as beneficial, I want to talk about the solutions. We can learn more about the educational value of these documentaries and shows to bring awareness to violence in our society, and we can also learn the effects of it. We can watch responsibly on what we can learn to support victims. We can get tools for learning, not just entertainment. People can recognize red flags also, which can be really helpful in their daily life. Amanda Vasquez, a writer for the ICGIA in 2017, states that at the most basic level, victims have fundamental needs, including the need for protection, security, and social services, as well as assistance with the strengthening of life skills to avoid vulnerability. We can watch with more empathy and curiosity to keep communities safer and prevent and recognize violence that could be going on around us. We can also reduce stigma around these documentaries and shows and uncomfortable topics that they might include that we might tend to avoid talking about. Talking about cases in our communities can reduce stigma and make others more aware of their surroundings. We can also encourage research about past cases, and research is never a bad thing, so in your free time you can just dive on into that and educate yourself. Anyone can start watching these shows and documentaries that they might usually avoid, which will open the mind to educational opportunities, which again is never a bad thing. So everybody can do what I plan to do myself, which is email the College of Arts and Letters at SDSU to suggest that they add a course on documentaries and shows about serial killers to the Film Studies department as part of their curriculum, so that students here can become more educated and we can learn how things that might seem scary can actually be a really good educational opportunity that can save you and help you. And it's also a way to increase awareness on our campus. Today I argued that serial killer shows and documentaries are actually educational and informative and not harmful. First, I talked about the problems and the controversies around this issue. Then I talked about its barriers, and then I offered a solution and an action step. So the next time you think about not watching the latest crime documentary, remember that it could save you from being